Eleanor never imagined her life would come to this. Only a year ago, she had been living in a warm house in the suburbs of Chicago, with wide windows and a kitchen that smelled of Sunday dinners. But divorce changes things faster than anyone expects. Her husband had left, the house was sold, and now she stood in a narrow hallway of a cheap apartment building, holding a single key to a one-bedroom unit she could barely afford. At 42, she felt like she had been thrown back to her teenage years, starting all over again with nothing but a suitcase and her son, Daniel, 19, followed quietly behind her, carrying 2 heavy bags. He had grown taller than her, his shoulders broad, his face serious. He was still a boy in many ways, but when Eleanor looked at him, she also saw the man he was becoming. His silence worried her. He had always been easygoing, but lately he seemed older than his years, weighed down by responsibility he shouldn't have had to carry. When they opened the door, the sight nearly broke her. The room was small, just big enough for a bed, a dresser, and a cracked desk by the window. There was no second bedroom, no space to give Daniel the privacy he deserved. The landlord had promised they would make it work, but Eleanor knew it would not be easy. She turned to her son with an apologetic smile, trying to hide her shame. "It's not much," she whispered, "but it's ours." Daniel nodded, placing the bags down. "It's fine, Mom," he said simply. But Eleanor could hear the effort in his voice. The way he tried to make her feel better when he was the one who should be comforted. That night, as they unpacked their few belongings, Eleanor arranged her clothes neatly in the tiny closet, while Daniel set up his textbooks on the desk. They worked silently, side by side, the room already feeling too small for their shared presence. The bed was another problem. Only one mattress sat against the wall. Eleanor insisted Daniel should take it, but he refused, shaking his head firmly. "You need it more than I do," he said. In the end, they compromised both would share, until they found a way to buy a second bed. It wasn't ideal, but it was all they had. That first night, Eleanor lay awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. She could hear Daniel's even breathing beside her, his arm close enough that she felt the warmth of it. The room was filled with the faint hum of the city outside, the rumble of cars, the voices of neighbors through thin walls. She felt exposed, as though their lives had been reduced to a single frame, every detail magnified. Days passed quickly, but the routine weighed heavy. Eleanor searched for jobs, walking the city streets with her resume, while Daniel attended classes at the community college. They would meet again each evening, sharing small meals cooked on the old stove, then retreating to their room. There was no escape, no separate space to breathe. At times, Eleanor caught herself watching Daniel as he studied, his brow furrowed, his jaw set. He carried himself with a quiet strength that surprised her. He had grown up faster than she realized. The closeness was comforting and painful at the same time. She loved having him near, but she also felt the sting of failure. This wasn't the life she had promised him. She wanted to give him freedom, a chance to feel young and careless, but instead, he was stuck in a cramped apartment with his mother, bearing struggles that weren't his to carry. One evening, after a long day of rejections, Eleanor returned home exhausted. Daniel was already there, books spread across the desk. He looked up and immediately stood to take her bag. "You're tired," he said softly, almost like a father speaking to his child. She smiled weakly, hiding the tears threatening to fall. "Just a long day," she whispered. They sat together on the edge of the bed, eating sandwiches in silence. Eleanor felt the strange comfort of his presence, his quiet loyalty. She realized that in this tiny room, their bond was growing stronger, but it was also complicated. The lines between roles blurred mother and son, partners in struggle, companions against loneliness. Every night when she lay down, she wondered if she leaned too heavily on him, if she asked too much of a boy who should be free to live his own life. But Daniel never complained. Instead, he seemed to watch her with an intensity she couldn't quite understand. Sometimes she caught his eyes lingering on her when he thought she wasn't looking. It wasn't disrespectful, not at all. It was something softer, something that made her chest ache. She reminded herself he was just being protective, just caring in the way he knew how. Still, it left her restless. One night, the power went out. The room was swallowed by darkness, and Eleanor heard Daniel shifting beside her. "It's okay, Mom," he said quietly, his hand brushing hers. She froze, startled by the simple touch. His hand lingered for a moment before pulling away. In that silence, Eleanor realized how fragile everything had become. Their lives were balanced on a thin thread: poverty, loneliness, and unspoken emotions weaving together into something she couldn't name. She turned her face toward the window, watching the moonlight break through the curtains. The room felt too small, yet it was all they had. She wondered how long they could live like this. Two souls pressed together by circumstance, searching for hope in the middle of loss. That was when she made herself a promise. She would find a way out. She would give Daniel the life he deserved, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. She would not let this small room define them. But deep inside, a question lingered: when everything was rebuilt. When the house was bigger and the rooms were separate, would the bond they had now, this closeness, this fragile intimacy, survive? And that thought stayed with her long into the night. As she listened to the sound of her son's steady breathing beside her, wondering if she was clinging to him as much as he clung to her, Eleanor's days soon became a cycle of searching. Every morning, she dressed in her best clothes and walked the streets of Chicago with a folder of resumes. She knocked on doors, spoke politely, and left hopeful smiles behind. But most replies were the same: "We'll call you by evening." She came back to the apartment drained, carrying the silence of rejection with her. One afternoon, while climbing the stairs with a bag of groceries, she struggled with the weight. The thin plastic handles cut into her hands. Suddenly, a voice behind her broke the moment. "Let me help you with that." She turned to see a man in his late 30s, tall, with kind eyes, carrying the bags from her arms with an easy strength. "I'm Michael," he said with a smile as they reached the door. "I live across the hall." "You must be new here." Eleanor introduced herself shyly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Michael had an ease about him that immediately softened the heaviness in her chest. He set the bags on the counter inside her apartment and stepped back, polite and careful not to intrude. "If you ever need help, don't hesitate to knock," he said before leaving. His kindness lingered long after the door closed. That evening, Daniel noticed her quiet mood. "Who was that?" he asked as he unpacked the groceries. "Just a neighbor," Eleanor replied quickly, trying to sound casual. "He offered to help." Daniel nodded, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't say more, though she sensed he was watching closely. In the days that followed, Michael appeared more often. Sometimes he brought coffee in the morning. Other times he offered to fix things in the apartment. The old faucet that leaked, the stubborn door that didn't close properly. He seemed eager to make her life easier. Eleanor was grateful. His presence was gentle, never demanding, but it filled a space inside her she hadn't realized was empty. One Saturday afternoon, Michael invited her to join him on the front steps for coffee. The autumn air was crisp, leaves falling slowly onto the sidewalk. Eleanor hesitated, glancing back at the apartment, where Daniel studied by the window. Then she stepped outside. They sat side by side, sipping coffee from paper cups. Michael spoke about his work, his simple routines, the loneliness of living alone. Eleanor found herself laughing at his light jokes, her voice sounding brighter than it had in months. She had forgotten how good it felt to be seen, not just as a mother, but as a woman with her own story. When she returned inside, Daniel looked up. His eyes flicked to the cup in her hand, then back to her face. "Was that Michael?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "He's kind. Just a neighbor." Daniel pressed his lips together, nodding slowly. But his silence was heavier than words. Over the next weeks, the pattern grew clearer. Michael was there, offering warmth and attention, and Eleanor began to feel lighter in his presence. She caught herself waiting for his knock, for his smile across the hall. She told herself it was harmless, that friendship was all it was. But deep inside, she knew there was something more. Daniel felt it too. He noticed the way her eyes brightened when Michael was near. He noticed how she lingered at the door when Michael left, her hand resting on the knob as though reluctant to close it. The changes were small, but to him, they were clear. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Daniel finally spoke. "Do you like him?" His voice was low, almost hesitant. Eleanor froze, her heart racing. She wanted to deny it, to brush it off as nothing, but lying felt heavier than truth. She sighed and sat beside him. "He's a good man," she admitted. "But it's complicated." Daniel stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "Complicated because of me?" Her chest tightened. "No," she said quickly, taking his hand. "You're my world. You've been with me through everything." Not The air inside the small apartment had grown heavier with each passing week. Eleanor felt it every time she entered the room, an unspoken weight that hung between her and Daniel. He wasn't angry, not exactly, but he was different. The lightness in his voice had faded, replaced by short answers and long silences. He stayed up late, his books spread across the desk, the glow of the lamp casting shadows on his face. Eleanor watched him sometimes, her heart aching, but she didn't know how to reach him. Michael's presence had only made things more complicated. Every smile, every act of kindness pulled her toward him, but each step closer to Michael seemed to push Daniel further away. Eleanor tried to balance it, tried to keep her son close, while allowing herself small moments of happiness, but the tension was impossible to hide. One rainy evening, the city outside blurred by steady streams of water sliding down the window. Eleanor decided she couldn't bear the silence anymore. She set her tea aside, sat across from Daniel on the edge of the bed, and spoke softly. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking the stillness. "Are you upset with me?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the open book before him, though she knew he wasn't reading. Finally, he closed it with a quiet thud, his gaze lifting to hers. His eyes held pain she hadn't seen before. "No, Mom," he said, his voice low. "I'm not upset. I don't want to lose you." The words struck her like a blade. She reached for his hand instinctively, holding it tightly. "Lose me, Daniel. You'll never lose me. Not to anyone, not ever." But as she said the words, her chest tightened. She thought of Michael, his gentle voice, his steady gaze, the way he reminded her she was more than her struggles. For months, she had been walking a careful line, pretending her heart wasn't divided, but now she saw it clearly. She was caught between two bonds: the loyalty to her son, who had carried her through the darkest time of her life, and the longing for a man who made her feel alive again. Daniel squeezed her hand, his voice shaking. "Everything's been just us, Mom. We've been through everything together. And now it feels like you're slipping away." Her throat closed. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that her heart could never turn from him. But she couldn't lie not when she knew he had noticed the truth already. Michael had changed things, and no matter how much she wanted to deny it, the change was written all over her face. "Daniel," she whispered, her eyes glistening, "you're my son. You're my anchor. But I'm also human. I get lonely. I've been trying so hard to hold everything together. Sometimes it feels like I've lost myself in the process." The confession hung in the air, trembling and raw. Daniel looked away, his jaw tight. He didn't speak for a long time, and Eleanor felt her heart racing, afraid she had broken something between them. Finally, he said quietly, "I understand. I just don't want someone to take you away from me." Her tears slipped free. She leaned closer, brushing his hair back the way she had when he was small. "No one could ever take me away from you," she said firmly. "But Daniel, you have to know, I can't keep living only in this room. I need to breathe again. And so do you." He nodded, though she could see the conflict still burning behind his eyes. It wasn't about control. It was about fear. Fear that their bond, the closeness born out of hardship, would vanish once someone else stepped in. That night, Eleanor lay awake beside him, the storm outside echoing the storm inside her. She thought of the years she had given to a marriage that had ended in betrayal. She thought of the sacrifices she had made to protect Daniel, the countless nights she had stayed strong for him. And she thought of the way Michael's simple smile made her remember she was still alive, still capable of feeling something for herself. But every time she tried to imagine a future with Michael, she saw Daniel's face. His quiet loyalty, his unspoken fears, his steady presence. To choose happiness for herself felt like a betrayal of the boy who had stood beside her when no one else did. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, the light just breaking through the blinds. She watched Daniel sleeping, his expression softer in rest. She realized then how much he had grown, how much responsibility he had carried for her sake. He deserved freedom, not a chain to her loneliness. And yet, in her heart, she wasn't sure she was ready to let go of the closeness that had kept them both alive. Later that day, Michael knocked on the door. Eleanor opened it, and their eyes met. He seemed ready to say something, but Daniel's presence in the background stopped him. With a polite smile, he simply asked, "Do you need anything today?" Eleanor shook her head, her voice quiet. "No, thank you." But when she closed the door, her heart ached with the weight of unspoken words. The days that followed were filled with careful silences. Eleanor and Daniel spoke about ordinary things, classes, groceries, the weather butt underneath. Both carried the memory of that rainy night. They had confessed the truth. He feared losing her, and she feared losing herself. Eleanor knew the moment of choice was coming. She couldn't keep balancing on the thin line between loyalty and longing. One day soon, she would have to decide: protect the fragile world she and her son had built, or take a step toward the life Michael offered. And as she sat by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker in the distance, she realized something important. This wasn't just about love. It was about courage, the courage to face the past, the courage to choose the future, and the courage to tell her son the truth, even if it broke his heart. The confession had changed everything. It had pulled their hidden fears into the open, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. But it had also opened a door, a chance for honesty, for healing, for growth. The only question was which path Eleanor would walk through that door, whether Daniel would walk with her or be left behind. The knock on the door came on a cold evening. Eleanor had just finished making soup when she heard it, steady and firm. She knew before opening that it would be Michael. When she pulled the door back, there he stood, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes holding a mix of hope and fear. "Eleanor," he said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the storm outside, "I can't keep quiet anymore. I care about you. I want to be in your life, not just as your neighbor, but as someone who loves you." Her breath caught. She froze, holding the door halfway open, the steam from the soup drifting past her into the hallway. She had waited for this moment without admitting it to herself. But now that it was here, she felt the weight of it pressing on her chest. Behind her, Daniel stood silently. He had heard everything. His eyes met hers through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. There was no anger in them, only questions she had no easy answer for. Eleanor's hand trembled on the doorknob. She glanced at Michael, then back at her son. Two worlds collided in that instant. One offered her a chance at love, companionship, and a future where she was more than a mother holding her life together. The other was the bond she had built through hardship, the closeness that had kept her and Daniel standing when everything else had crumbled. Michael took a careful step forward. "You don't have to answer right away," he said gently. "But I need you to know how I feel." His words were sincere, his eyes steady, his voice carrying the warmth she had longed for. Eleanor's heart twisted. She wanted to say yes, to reach for the happiness he offered. But then she felt Daniel's presence behind her, his silence louder than any protest. He was her son, her companion, through nights of fear, the one person who had never left her side. Could she risk wounding that bond by letting someone else in? "Michael," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I can't answer tonight. I need time." He gave a small nod, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "I'll wait," he said simply. Then he turned and walked down the hall, leaving the sound of his footsteps fading into the storm. Eleanor closed the door slowly, leaning against it as her strength gave way. Her hands shook, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. When she finally looked up, Daniel was still there, watching her. "Do you love him?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp, like a blade cutting through the silence. She hesitated, her throat tightening. "I don't know," she admitted, "but he makes me feel alive again. He makes me feel like I'm more than just someone surviving." Daniel's shoulders stiffened, his eyes clouded. And what about me? Am I not enough? The question pierced her. She crossed the room quickly, taking his hands in hers. Daniel, you're everything to me. You've given me strength when I had none, but you're my son. You're not supposed to carry all my burdens. I don't want you to feel like you have to replace what I've lost. He looked away, his jaw tight, struggling with emotions too heavy for words. It just feels like if he comes in, I'll lose you, he whispered. Eleanor pulled him into a tight embrace, her tears finally spilling. You'll never lose me, not ever. No man could take me away from you. But you deserve to live your life, and I need to find mine again. We can't stay trapped in this room forever. For a long moment, they stayed like that, holding each other as the rain pounded against the window. Eleanor knew the truth. Love wasn't a simple choice between one or the other. It was about balance, about opening the heart without breaking what was already there. Days passed, and the apartment grew quieter. Michael kept his distance, giving Eleanor space, while Daniel avoided.